Well, we're on the third to last team of this series. It's Vikings Day, which means it's my favorite time of year. We get to talk about all the ways that Minnesota sports just refuses to be normal.
They cannot, they will not, I don't expect them to be. Honestly, from an outsider's perspective, it's kind of what makes them cool.
Oh, they're great television for people who aren't Vikings fans.
Exactly.
They're just completely incapable of being a normal fucking football team for like 5 minutes, including last year, for like the first 7-8 weeks or so, when Kirk Cousins was upright. And actually, you know what? Even then they weren't normal because they ran the ball like 4 times a game. So I guess we never really got to see any normal Vikings football last year. But then after the Kirk injury, it just got weirder and weirder and weirder. And I don't mean bad. I just mean weird. They were the only team in the NFL, like across the entire league, that functioned the way that they functioned last year. And we will get into exactly what I mean by that throughout this episode. But suffice to say, there is nobody else in the league that is like the Minnesota Vikings. They are a one of one.
I totally agree with that. As long as you're not emotionally invested, which we're not, it's a lot of fun to watch. If you're a Vikings fan, I'm really sorry.
There's going to be highs, there's going to be lows, but most of all, there's going to be fun because the Minnesota Vikings, if nothing else, are just ridiculous, silly fun. So sit back, relax, grab yourself a drink. I didn't know what Minnesota whiskey I could pull out of my... Actually, I don't have any whiskey from Minnesota, so I pulled out the only thing I could think of that was Minnesota-y, and that's Old Elk, just because it has elk in the name. So if you're a Minnesotan and you know of any Minnesota distilleries, please let me know, because that's one of the only states that I don't have represented in my liquor cabinet. But anyway, sit down, relax, pour yourself something nice, and listen to the next hour or so of us trying to make sense of the Minnesota Vikings. Jay, roll the intro. Welcome to the Bootleg Football Podcast. I'm Brett. That's EJ. Talking Vikings today. Super fun episode. We have a whole bunch of really fun stats that I think encapsulate how unique this team is. And I don't say that word lightly. They are a very unique team. Again, they don't play the sport like everybody else does. We have a bunch of Vikings news to talk about, including Justin Jefferson setting the non-quarterback contract record this offseason. Actually, we're recording this on the day that Receiver dropped on Netflix. We haven't watched it yet, but after we record this episode, we'll probably check that out. Again, it's July 10th, so some of the information that we talk about in this episode might change by the time this drops in the middle of camp, and we apologize if that happens. But before we get into it, EJ, how you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good for having to talk about the Vikings all day. Everybody knows I'm a Bears fan, but I do enjoy watching Vikings football. There's a lot of Vikings players I like. I think the addition of Brian Flores and what he's brought to the franchise has been a really nice counterpoint, offset to Kevin O'Connell on offense, who's always fun to watch because, as you said, doesn't do things like everybody else does them. And you got to have teams like that in the league. They add color, they add flavor, and they've been good. So I don't have any problem watching Vikings games. It's, again, I'm not emotionally invested, but it's a fun team to talk about.
Before we dive into 2023, by the way, and kind of go through everything that happened last year, as well as everything that's happened in the offseason since then, kind of going through their roster building process piece by piece, setting the stage for 2024. Before we do all that, I do want to thank Underdog Fantasy for making this series possible in the first place. Honestly, we've been going team by team. This is number 30 out of 32.
Correct.
All 8 divisions, 2 months straight. For those of you that have watched every single episode, first of all, you guys are just as psycho as we are, and we appreciate you, all like 12 of you that have watched every show. But for those of you that have not watched every show and you're just popping in for the first time, welcome. You have a whole back catalog that you could enjoy here, and it's all been made possible by Underdog. So whether you're doing pick'ems this season or season-long pick'ems now, there's a whole bunch of Vikings options that are up right now, especially by the time this goes live in the middle of camp. So if you like doing season-long pick'ems, if you like doing best ball drafts, if you like doing pick'ems on baseball or on golf or on any other summer sport that you've tolerated watching until football came back, which is really all baseball is to me at this point. And I say that as somebody who played baseball for 12 years growing up. As an Angels fan, it's just something we put on TV to try to pass the time until training camp starts again. But if you want to make it more interesting, you could do pick'ems for baseball as well. Remember, if you use promo code BOOTLEG, either at the QR code on the screen or at the link in the description, you get up to $250 in bonus cash, as well as a free pick'em special in the lobby. So again, thank you, Underdog, for supporting us through this whole series. Thank you to everybody who's supported Underdog for supporting us. We are very close to the finish line here. So EJ, inch us a little bit closer by taking us through 2023 in Vikings lore.
Speaking of rough emotional investments, Angels fan?
Oh, dude, don't even get me started.
I won't. It would
Angels, Texans, Bears. That was my childhood.
Okay. It explains a lot of things.
My father will not see heaven for putting me through this. It's all his fault. Anyway.
Last year, the Vikings, overall record 7-10, rank in the division third, home record 2-6. Look, Vikings got to be better in front of the home fans. You got to defend home turf better than they did. We know why. We'll talk about it. Road record 5-4, slid down the stretch a little bit, 1-4 in their last 5 games. We've got a couple numbers to try and pull those apart. We'll talk about all the injury impacts, obviously, that created those numbers. But in terms of nuance and pulling stats apart, we've got 2 for you this year. The first one is QBS. If you've been watching the series, you're familiar with it. If not, if you're new to it, it's called quarterback support. It's a stat I came up with Arjun Menon, who now works for the Jets, in the second half of last year that really talks about how well a team sets the table for their quarterback to play. It's 3 offensive stats, a defensive stat, and a special team stat rolled together. It's a 0 to 100 rating, 0 being the worst, 100 being the best. On that scale, the Vikings were a 61.3 for a very respectable 13th out of 32 teams in the league. So they set the table at a very good rate. The second number is power score, which we introduced you to last year in this series, which is simply taking rushing offense, passing offense, rush defense, pass defense, points scored and points allowed, and assigning the Vikings their league rank. Where did they finish compared to their peers? Everybody wants to be number one. Vikings, spoiler alert, weren't number one in anything. Rush offense, they were 25th. Passing offense, 17th. Rush defense, 17th. Pass defense, 14th. A lot of middle of the pack ranks for the Vikings. Points scored, 22nd. Not great. And points allowed, 14th. So again, if you look at all those defensive ranks, you're talking about 17th, 14th, and 14th. Really solid performance on that side of the ball. If you add all those up, divide by 6, you get the Vikings power score, which is 18.2. And that put them 20th overall. So they set the table at the 13th best level, but performed at the 18th best level.
That's got to be one of the largest negative differentials, right, in this whole series?
Funny you should bring that up, Coleman. 2023 Vikings were tied for the third largest negative difference, -7, between how well they set the table, 13th, and how well they actually performed, 20th.
So when you lose your top 12 starting quarterback in the league and you lose your best, honestly, might be the best non-quarterback player at any position in the league, if you lose them for either the entire half of the year or a significant chunk of the year, yeah, you're going to underperform. And you saw, after the Kirk and especially after the Jefferson injury, how they had to lean into a very unique brand of football just to stay afloat. And they kind of zigged when everybody thought they were going to zag, right? Because if you lose your quarterback and you lose Justin Jefferson, you're like, all right, they're going to be a very run-centric team. Like, that's how they're going to have to survive. And O'Connell was like, well, no, because we don't really have the running back to do that. Our offensive line is average at run blocking. I would say average, maybe even, actually, no, not even above average, just average. But if you have an average run blocking line, but a below average starting running back, you can't really use that as the engine to your offense. And so they had a really interesting split where they were the 4th lowest run rate in the entire NFL at about 32.9%, which is very low. Top teams are around 46, 47. But at the same time, they had the highest play action rate at 32%. So they just wanted to make it look like they were going to run without actually running. And they just pass. And again, made it work. They still won some games, after Kirk and Jefferson were out that they probably shouldn't have won just because Kevin O'Connell was like, fuck it, we're going to see what happens. If you're looking at the types of routes that both Kirk and the flurry of other guys throwing the ball for them last year were throwing, they were a team that really leaned on work in the middle of the field. The Vikings receiving core caught the second most post routes, crossing routes, and seam routes all kind of get like anything that's middle, intermediate area of the field. They caught the second most number or second highest number of those throughout the entire league. And at the same time, the Vikings quarterback group were fifth in turnover worthy plays. So it's a team that wanted to look like they ran the ball a lot, didn't actually run the ball a lot, asked their quarterbacks to execute in a very dangerous part of the field, and did sometimes, but also turn the ball over a lot and put a lot of pressure on their defense, which just itself was a whole basket of insanity. And Brian Flores, by the way, just did the Lord's work last year. Like, he was kind of outgunned talent-wise, and so they also played a very unique brand of defensive football where they were simultaneously the team that dropped 8 into coverage the most and only rushed 3 the most, while also being the team that by more than double, like by more than a factor of 2, brought 6+. So they didn't bring 4, they didn't bring 5. It was, we're either going all the way or not at all, and they had this just crazy aggressive / deceptive defense where they would pack the line of scrimmage and you never knew if they were calling 0 or if they were dropping out to cover 2. They simultaneously called twice as much 0 as cover 1 and also the most cover 2 in the league. It's such a weird, hilarious, wildly effective defense that kind of carried the team for a while because, again, the quarterbacks were turning the ball over at a pretty high rate. Like, even Kirk had some kind of bad turnovers because O'Connell was like, hey man, we work the middle of the field. We don't have a run game to lean on. Live by the sword, die by the sword. And anytime they died by the sword offensively, Brian Flores was like, fuck it, we ball. And like, that was the whole mentality for this team, was just, let's just see if this works. And sometimes it did and sometimes it didn't, but nobody else played like them. And that's why they were such good TV despite only being a 7-win team. Like, I watched every single Vikings game because they were so just awesome. Like, I loved how different they were from everybody else.
And Flores reinventing himself in the middle of last year was one of the most underreported stories in the NFL. We talked about it last year on our podcast. Everybody had an idea of how Brian Flores played and what he liked to run and everything else. And he went into the year starting off that way, just like the rest of the Vikings team started off with their plan from the previous year. And mid-season, he had to change it up completely. Like, he had to jump to the other horse in the middle of the river, and he did it. And it was fascinating, and it was compelling, and it was interesting, and it was different. And a lot of people just weren't talking about it. And it's like, no, he's not doing the same thing he's always done. It's still working. It's still crazy. It's this toggle switch aggression that you talked about. Either everything's going to show up in your lap or nothing's going to show up in your lap. And because you don't know which one it is, that's why it's working. He made it work, but it was a switch from what he's done previously throughout his career, which was awesome and fascinating. And back to the offense, probably one of the biggest validations ever that play action success is not determined off running success.
Yeah.
You do not have to run the ball for play action to work. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but smart folks have been saying it for a long time. Play action is not about running success. Play action is about creating hesitation. That's it. You're creating space using hesitation, and it doesn't require that you run the ball well because people are still going to flinch when you do it, and that's all you need them to do. And the Vikings were the absolute poster children for, see, we told you, we got no running game, and play action still working for us most of the time.
I do think the Aaron Jones pickup, though, was indicative of the fact of like, all right, we did it for 1 year.
Yeah.
But we do have to actually attempt to run the ball in 2024 a little bit. Like, we can't do that 2 years in a row because it got ridiculous after a while.
Yeah, fool me once. Yeah, okay. But fool me twice, probably not going to happen.
That does bring us, by the way, to the front office and coaching staff. The same front office that picked up Aaron Jones, among other things, in their grocery cart this offseason. Fun group, smart group, innovative group, and probably the main reason why the Vikings were not significantly worse than 7 wins last year.
because they are creative, because they are smart, because they will push the envelope. And I think that starts at the top with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. Came from the analytics side of personnel, but I would not say is purely a numbers guy, understands football in a holistic way, but is also going to fill the rest of the team as the general manager with people that think like him, which is people that think, people that use their brains, people that will adapt and innovate. Kevin O'Connell, you talked about the changes he made on offense as the head coach. The assistant head coach is also the outside linebackers coach. That's Mike Pettin, who was with the Packers for a long time, stays in the division with the Vikings. Offensive coordinators, Wes Phillips. Defensive coordinator, Brian Flores. We just talked about him. And the special teams coordinator is Matt Daniels. Notable coaches on offense. Brian Angelico is the offensive pass game coordinator and tight ends coach. I bring this up because I don't know if it's unique in the league, but it's rare. Usually that position is not the tight ends coach.
Mm-hmm.
It's the quarterback's coach, it's the wide receivers coach, or it's just its own title. The fact that the Vikings use their tight end coach to also be their offensive pass game coordinator explains a lot about how TJ Hockenson gets used.
It also reminds me of Ben Johnson, who I believe was the tight ends coach under Dan Campbell in Detroit before he got promoted to OC. So again, it's not entirely unheard of, but it is rare. But there is a recent example in the same division of it working super well.
Yeah, worth pointing out for that reason alone. Keenan McCardell is the wide receiver coach, former Jacksonville Jaguar great, doing a tremendous job with one of the most dynamic receiving rooms in the entire league. And Josh McCown is the quarterback's coach. So Josh McCown had this acceleration to his career after a long and diverse playing career, played with more teams and started for more teams. I was going to say,
he might also be a Jacksonville Jaguars great and a Jets great and a Bengals great. I don't know.
And there was this false inflation, I think, at the beginning where people were like, oh, he's going to be a head coach. And it's like, oh, let's pump the brakes on that.
He was close.
He almost was
real close.
And that probably would have gone terribly. I think it will be better for Josh McCown in the long run and his coaching prospects to, again, take a slightly more traditional path, position coach, then eventually pass game coordinator or offensive coordinator, then ascend to the top spot, because that's a big jump going from playing to being a head coach. So McCown currently with the Vikings, learning some great lessons under Kevin O'Connell and the rest of the staff on defense and special teams. Durante Jones is the defensive pass game coordinator and the DB coach, fourth season as the DB coach and second as the defensive pass game coordinator. He's also coached in Miami, Cincinnati, and at LSU. Mike Saravo is the inside linebackers coach. If you're going to coach inside linebackers for Brian Flores or in a Brian Flores controlled defense, you're pretty good at your job. They're really important to what he does on defense, and he's not going to put somebody in charge of that position group that he doesn't fully trust.
100%.
Marcus Dixon is the defensive line coach, spent the last 2 seasons as Denver's defensive line coach, was a UDFA from Hampton, of all places, in 2008, played on the Jets from 2010 to 12, where he was teammates with...
Who was on the Jets from 10 to... a lot of guys. D'Brickashaw Ferguson, that counts, right?
It does. However, the relevant name is head coach Kevin O'Connell.
Kevin O'Connell was on the Jets that year? Really?
Indeed.
Speaking of journeyman quarterbacks.
There you have it.
Now, given all of that, the coach talk, the schematic oddities, the personnel, everything we've talked about so far, that does bring us to the Underdog top 3, which is where we try to identify values for all 32 teams as it relates to fantasy football. Obviously, you're not going to get a value on Justin Jefferson, so he is not featured in this segment. Doesn't mean that he ain't worth the first overall pick, which in a lot of leagues, he is going first overall. It's either him or CD or CMC generally, so top 3 pick. Yes, he's worth it. He's JJ. He's always going to be worth it. Everybody else on this offense can be had at a pretty decent value, which kind of surprised me because it's a very effective offense when everybody's healthy. They have a good offensive line, in my opinion. Not like a perfect offensive line, but a good offensive line where it counts, the tackle position. They have good receivers. They have a couple quarterbacks that I think are intriguing and a very young quarterback that I think could be pretty good in the league. They have an upgraded running back this year. They have a tight end who we like a lot. And it just feels like the entire offense has had suppressed fantasy value this summer because I think a lot of people are still in wait and see mode, which is good for us.
Correct.
So, given that, our top 3 values, Jordan Addison is at wide receiver 39, right behind Rome Odunze, by the way. So the Bears have 3 receivers ranked ahead of Jordan Addison right now, which
Not correct.
I love the Bears receiving core, but you're not going to have 3 guys that outproduce Jordan Addison this year. I just don't think that's going to happen. So that by itself is a value, and I think a lot of people are suppressing his value because they don't know who's throwing him the ball. But regardless of whether it's Sam Darnold or J.J. McCarthy, I have pretty high, not hopes, I have a pretty high expectation for Jordan Addison going into this year. He's a brilliantly talented number 2. You have Aaron Jones at RB19, which again, I think a lot of people are going off of the run rate from last year in Minnesota. They just didn't run the ball that much, but I also think they didn't run the ball that much because they didn't have Aaron Jones. So it's kind of a chicken or the egg type thing here. Yep. I would bet that Aaron Jones gets at least 4 to 5 more carries a game than any Vikings running back last year, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but over the course of a season, it's a significant number. And then you get Sam Darnold versus J.J. McCarthy. Darnold's at QB 35, J.J.'s at QB 30, so neither one of them are going as, either QB 1s or QB 2s in fantasy. They're both going as essentially QB 3s, and that's because nobody knows who's going to start. My thought initially, which is why I highlighted Sam Darnold at QB 35, is that it's his job until it's not his job. And I just don't know how long it's going to take JJ to get on the field. So I'm not going to draft him ahead of Sam Darnold when Darnold might be playing the bulk of the fantasy relevant season, right? Like you might be getting Darnold for 8, 9, 10 games if they've won enough that they don't have to bench him. Like you might get him for 8, 9, 10 games before we even see JJ step on the field. So I'm not going to draft JJ McCarthy at QB 30 if we might not see him until after Halloween, damn near after Thanksgiving, if everything's going well. I would rather have Darnold because, again, in best ball, like we don't have to start him every week. We just have to hope he pops off a few of those, and then it's worth it. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my opinion on it is JJ is the better prospect, but he's also not going to get snaps, and I would rather draft the guy that's going to get snaps for sure.
I think it's the best case scenario for the Vikings, and this is meshing real football with fantasy football, that Darnold starts early on and they don't have to put JJ out to the Wolves immediately. I think that's best for the organization. I think it's best for the young quarterback. And in terms of fantasy players, it's best that you draft Darnold because, again, he has a really good situation. He has a former quarterback as a head coach. He has a system that is going to create as many quarterback-friendly opportunities as they can. Again, they played the way they played last year only because they didn't have all the talent. The talent is back. They have a better running game. They're not going to have to put as much on Darnold's plate. And I think O'Connell is going to be able to create or craft a situation for Darnold that is as fantasy positive as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So get Darnold, see how long it lasts. If it goes wildly off the rails, sure, they're going to throw McCarthy out there and say, hey, we're done. We don't have any hope. We're going to get development snaps and get those out of the way this year in a lost season. I don't expect that to happen, so I would draft Darnold ahead of McCarthy.
And let's be real, McCarthy was one of the quarterbacks in this class that everybody agreed probably should sit as long as they can help it.
Yeah.
And
barely 21.
Yeah, he's so young, and he's still even just at Michigan, like you saw the development curve, which was positive, but he's not all the way there. He's not even close to being all the way there. And there's debate about, okay, is it better to give a guy experience through reps, or is it better to give a guy experience through, osmosis and watching a veteran do it? I think both approaches have positives and negatives.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like the Vikings want to do the whole, learn by watching rather than learn by doing approach. And they're going to do that as long as they possibly can. Like as long as they are winning half their games. Like if they're 500 going into November, I don't think Darnold's going to get benched because they think the best thing for JJ is to learn how to be a pro before he's asked to be a pro. And the best way to learn to be a pro is to see a pro do it. Just like Pat Mahomes did in Kansas City, just like Jordan Love in Green Bay. For as many guys, as you see get thrown in immediately that have success, there's just as many that sit for a while and still have success. So I think there's more ways to do this than just one. And it feels like the Vikings are leaning towards, let's let the kids sit.
Absolutely. And going back to Aaron Jones, he's not done. Guy's a killer. He's definitely better than the options they had last year, and he's going to produce. Jordan Addison, I think wide receiver 3 is really important on this team as well. Addison clearly wide receiver 2, but they had Osborne last year. Brandon Powell this year. Like, Brandon Powell's fine. He's penciled in as wide receiver 3. He's not going to be pulling as many targets away from Jordan Addison as Osborne did. So his production is going to go up relative no matter who's playing quarterback, just because the receiver options are different this year in Minnesota than they were last year. So I think all 3 of these guys can offer value in certain ways. And, again, the star is on JJ Jefferson, or on JJ, but that's not where you're looking for value. And that's what we're trying to concentrate on in this segment.
We'll dive a little bit more into McCarthy as a player and our evaluations of him when we get to the draft. But before we get to April, we have to talk about March, which brings up free agency. Again, this team had to make a lot of tough decisions, including at, the most important position on the team. I don't want to call it a saga, but it was a storyline, throughout the entire early offseason of would they, won't they, because they were sitting there at 11. They were kind of out of range for most of the quarterbacks, and there was thoughts that, okay, as many as 4 could go in the top 10, and then you had 6 eventually go in the top 12. So it's like, can they get all the way up there to take the one they want? Is New England going to take the bait? Would the Cardinals or the Chargers be willing to trade down? Would the Giants be willing to trade down? Eventually, they did what they did, and they got JJ at 10. But for the early part of the offseason, there was chatter that they didn't think they would be able to go up. And so they were going to try to retain Kirk with all their might, which eventually, of course, didn't happen because Atlanta came in and said, please, for the love of God, save us, Kirk Cousins. We will give you as much money as you want. And Minnesota just couldn't match.
Right. So a lot of Vikings had to move on besides Kirk. Obviously, Kirk is the headliner. Only played 45% of the snaps, but that's not because he wasn't good. That's because he got hurt. And Atlanta wanted his services desperately. So Minnesota has to deal with creating a succession plan. They've done that with Darnold and McCarthy. Jordan Hicks, the linebacker, also moved on. He played 71% of the snaps. He's now with the Browns. Josh Dobbs is a 49er, backing up Brock Purdy. And Anthony Barr, who didn't play a lot last year, only 4.3% of the snaps, but has played a lot for the Vikings in the past, also moved on, currently unsigned. DJ Wanham, one of my biggest draft misses. DJ Wanham was, I don't know about you, but every year I have a first guy I watch, period, when I sit down to really get into film hardcore in terms of writing reports and everything else. DJ Wanham was the guy that year.
He was the first one you watched?
He was the first one I watched to write a full report. Again, I've seen guys from previous years.
I'm saying for that draft class. You started your draft class with DJ Wanham.
I did. It's always a bit of a dart throw.
Be the most random starting.
It's always a little random. But DJ Wanham was the guy, and I was whelmed. I wasn't super underwhelmed. I wasn't super overwhelmed. I thought he's going to be pretty average. That's the report I wrote. He's outperformed every expectation I had for him. Vikings did a tremendous job developing him. He's now a Panther. KJ Osborne, as we mentioned, is now a Patriot. No longer wide receiver 3 on this team. Alexander Mattison is a Raider. And Danielle Hunter is a Texan.
Yeah, they kind of swapped edge rushers with Houston because they let Danielle go there, and then they brought in Grenard, try to get a little bit younger at the position. They do different things, by the way. To me, Danielle is the overall better player, and that's not like a biased opinion. I think a lot of Vikings fans remember how great Danielle Hunter is. But at the same time, I think, again, they just wanted a little bit more youth, a little bit more longevity. Danielle is probably a 2-year guy. Grenard's probably a 3 or 4 year guy for them. So that's kind of the decision I think they were trying to make there. And the contracts are also structured very differently too. In terms of who they did retain, Brandon Powell, we mentioned, he is back, going to be competing for that wide receiver 3 spot. Jonathan Bullard God, I can't believe he is still kicking around. Jonathan Bullard.
I was waiting for that.
Age 31, he is back once again. Dalton Reisner is back as well. Justin Jefferson, the $35 million man, worth every penny.
Yep.
I don't want to hear anybody grumbling about it. Like, that's for what he gives this team. 35 still ain't enough. You know, when we were at the combine and we heard 32 and a half floated around, I was like, they better sign that today because that's a steal. Ended up being 35 because as the receiver market developed, his price just kept going up and up and up. But, you know, he's worth every single penny of that to them. Harrison Smith, back once again, age 35.
He can retire anytime.
He can. He's going to be in the Ring of Honor, like slam dunk Ring of Honor. Might not make the Hall of Fame just because I think Harrison Smith hasn't been not recognized. Like, the national media knows Harrison Smith's been great for a long time, but it feels like, as you know, as far as accolades go and, you know, all decade and all that kind of stuff, he's never gotten the accolades that I thought he deserved, especially early in his career. Like mid to late 20s, Harrison Smith was a dog. And he never really got the attention that I thought he deserved at his peak. So he probably won't make the Hall of Fame because of that. But he, at minimum, will be in the Ring of Honor in Minnesota. Tremendous player in his generation. As far as third-party additions, mentioned Jonathan Grenard coming in at a cool $19 million a year. Big pickup for them. You know, Houston, the reason why they swapped out Grenard for Danielle Hunter is just the rush style of Grenard. Didn't necessarily fit what they were looking for because Grenard would, I guess freelance is the correct word for it. But I mean, he was very good at getting sacks, like very good at getting sacks. And I think Flores, for the style that the Vikings play, he's cool with it because the Texans just rush the passer differently than the Vikings rush the passer, in the sense that the Texans use a lot of four-man rushes, the Vikings don't. And so I think they have a higher tolerance for artistic creativity, right? So Grenard's a good fit for them. It'll probably work pretty well. Blake Cashman, this is the one that just gutted me. Like absolutely eviscerated me was them taking Blake Cashman from Houston. He played at, I mean, dare I say, an all-pro level last year. He didn't get recognition for it whatsoever because he's Blake Cashman. But if you're looking at not just tape, but every single advanced metric, he was phenomenal last year. Like absolutely phenomenal. He was one of the 5 or 6 best linebackers in the NFL when he was on the field last year. And they got him for $7.5 million. So that's a great pickup. He is such an underrated player. You know, injuries early in his career, you know, especially when he was with the Jets, I think kind of delayed him blossoming. And I was huge on him coming out in the draft too. So maybe it's a little bit of pre-draft bias, but he didn't really get to show what he could do until he got to Houston. And he showed a very, very good linebacker. So that's probably the signing for them of the year for me. Shaq Griffin, they brought him in to try to bolster a corner room that really, really needs help. I'm not sure Shaq Griffin's the answer there, but hey, we're just throwing shit at the wall, seeing what sticks. Aaron Jones, about $7 million, they brought him in. Yes, he's 30, but if you're looking at how Aaron Jones was used in Green Bay, he was constantly underutilized, and there's a lot less tread off those tires than you think for a running back who's 30 because Green Bay, for whatever reason, just kind of refused to use him as much as they could have or should have over his time there in Green Bay. Jihad Ward, speaking of guys still kicking around the league, they brought him in about $1.8 million. Andrew Van Ginkel, God, I love Van Ginkel. Yep. You know, he has familiarity, obviously, with Flores and his defense, and he's very, very good in his Sam linebacker role where he's just as effective going forward as he is going backwards. He can cover, he can rush, he plays the run. He just does a little bit of everything. Great, great player, especially for $10 million a year. And then finally, Sam Darnold, also at $10 million a year. So you can see how all the money that they would have given to Kirk Cousins, they just kind of spread out across everybody else. Yes, they paid JJ, but they also brought in Darnold. They brought in an edge rusher, 2 edge rushers actually. They brought in Aaron Jones. They brought in a great linebacker. When you don't pay a quarterback top tier money, or really just when you don't pay a quarterback anything over $40 million, you can do this. You can bring in an absolute shitload of free agent talent while also retaining your own free agents. And I think that's kind of what the Vikings are going for. They're trying to capitalize on that cheap quarterback window by just making the overall roster as good as they possibly can.
Yeah, we already talked about Aaron Jones as a great pickup for this offense. On the defensive side, Van Ginkel and Cashman, both of them, going to this particular defense, playing for Flores in this style of defense. I was like, oh, man, for both of them.
It's perfect.
Great fits. They're going to be great players. Anybody who's, if you're a Minnesota fan and you were like, $10 million for Van Ginkel, yes. The answer is yes. He will be worth every single penny of that in Minnesota. Really good pickups. And again, a very smart approach to how to spread your resources on each side of the ball. Make up for those losses. Again, they didn't pay Hunter either. You can spread that money around the defense, fill in some holes, bring in some impact players, get younger. It's a lot of really smart and I feel like connected moves for this team.
Moving on from March now, that takes us to April. Looking at this draft class for Minnesota, which we loved at the time and I think we still love now. I do want to take a moment to talk about Kyrie Jackson, who was a part of this draft class. We're recording this the week after he tragically passed away in a car accident where he was a passenger in the car. And I know Vikings fans know this, but for those of you who somehow didn't see this story, he was a passenger in a car that got sideswiped by a drunk driver and got run off the road, and they crashed, and all three passengers, including Kyrie, passed away in that accident. Just absolutely horrific. He's a 24-year-old kid who was a great story of, perseverance and just trying to make it in football, playing at a low-level JUCO and then getting an opportunity to transfer from there to Bama and then, taking a chance on himself and leaving Bama and going to Oregon so he can get play time and just being a brilliant player. He was one of my favorite corners in this entire class. I loved Kyrie Jackson as a player. He was a great human as well. I was rooting so hard for him, and I know he was going to be amazing. If we're just talking about value, I thought he was the most valuable pick this team had, not just as a player, but also as a person. Talking to my friends at the Oregon program, they all adored him. They thought he was going to be, a great presence in the locker room, a great presence in the community, and a great presence on the field. And it's just awful that somebody who was, only a couple weeks away from having his lifelong dream realized had it taken away by something so stupid.
Yeah, heartbreaking. Great player, great pick, great fit with the team. Everybody that had already interacted with him in Minnesota in his early time there was really impressed by the way he brought that energy, and we're looking forward to, that for years to come. Just a horrible situation. So thoughts go out to his family and the families of the other folks that died in the accident as well. Just an awful situation. Take an Uber, folks.
It's not that hard. Just call an Uber. So, it's going to be tough. And, I'm going to be thinking of Kyrie every single time, I watch this team play. And I'm sure everybody in that locker room will as well. And they're going to play their asses off for him this year and every coming year, because this one's just tough. So, again, toast out to Kyrie, prayers to his family. It's just awful. This is going to be the most awkward transition possible, but it's a transition we got to make. Let's talk about the rest of the Vikings rookie class. EJ, I'll let you take it from here.
JJ McCarthy right up at the top, quarterback from Michigan. We talked about him, national champion. They get him pick number 10. Again, very young quarterback, athletically talented. When we had Matt Bowen on pre-draft, he talked about JJ because he knows JJ, coached in the same league against him in high school, coached with summer camps with JJ McCarthy. So very familiar with the player, talked about his strengths both mentally and physically on the field. I think he's going to develop into a good pro. I'm very glad that he is not going to be thrown into the starting role anywhere, not just in Minnesota, but anywhere in week one. I don't think that would have been ideal for him. Yes, he could have handled it. It's not that trial by fire is too tough for him or anything else. I think it, again, is going to be a better development arc for JJ McCarthy if he gets to learn a little bit and then gets on the field When he does, we'll see how he plays, but I think all the pieces are there, and certainly everybody that has coached against him, coached him, played with him, has glowing things to say about him as a leader and a quarterback. I think the talent is certainly there. We'll see once he gets on the field. Dallas Turner. Got to go for, we're talking about artistic impression. If you're not familiar, there is a series where the NFL has the rookies try and draw their new team logo, and this is Dallas Turner's effort, and it is a strong one.
He's got some talent, man.
Typically, these things are terrible and unrecognizable. When I saw this one, I had to have it. I was like, damn, not only is he an athletic and talented pass rusher, he can draw a little bit.
Yeah, he's got like that Pixar / kind of Death Clock style, which I know is a very deep cut reference, but for those of you that watched Metalocalypse, like kind of little Metalocalypse influence in there. Like he can draw, man.
He can hit it. Also on the field, tremendous prospect as an edge rusher. More outright athletic talent right now than polished edge rusher, but not unpolished. He wins in ways that are not only based on his athletic traits. I think a lot of people, because he's such a good athlete, say, oh, he just wins because he's quick. He just wins because he can bend. No, he has polish and style and technique. He doesn't have all of it yet. It's a narrower cone than a lot of other edge rushers in this class. But on top of that, he's got the base physical skills that every team's looking for in terms of thresholds. He's got those, like, gobs of those, buckets of those. Incredibly quick, powerful, good with his hands. He's going to continue to develop, and he landed in the perfect spot because the Vikings have a long track record of developing young athletic edge rushers. I have every hope that Dallas Turner is going to reach his potential, which is massive.
By the way, for those of you that also want to get that shirt, you can find it on our clothing partner, Homage. We do get a cut of anything that you guys buy at that link in the description. So if you too want Dallas Turner's drawings on your chest, it's right there for you.
Or your team's rookies, which we cannot vouch for the quality of their.
None of them are as good at drawing as Dallas Turner.
Yeah, Dallas might be the best. Walter Rouse is, again, physically very, very talented. We talked to folks we know inside the Oklahoma program, and we're like, man, if he puts it together, it's all there. So, again, a developmental prospect, and the Vikings have done very well. They did very well with Brian O'Neill, bringing in a very athletic tackle, molding him into what he is today. So that's the hopeful path for Walter Rouse. Will Reichard, the kicker from Alabama, also in the 6th round at 203. Michael Juergens, the center from Wake Forest, in the 7th round at 230. And Levi Drake Rodriguez, interior defensive lineman, Texans A&M Commerce, checking in. 7th round, 232.
Which I'm pretty sure, if memory serves, is the same school that Chris Ballard used to be the DC at way back in the day, right?
Ooh, I think that's true.
When he was coaching Al Harris, I think that was a fun fact that we learned recently. We're like, Chris Ballard was Al Harris's DC? Like, yeah, that was a thing that happened.
As a matter of fact, he was.
It's a great class. I do want to touch on McCarthy and Turner at the top for myself. I'll start with McCarthy. I started out the draft process not really being into it, right? Because I had watched games live during the season, and I was like, they're not really asking him to do anything, right? Like, he's just kind of along for the ride. And, I get it. He had a lot of responsibility in terms of, spitting out play calls in the huddle. And, in typical Harbaugh fashion, they were very long, wordy play calls, and he had to know a lot. And, he had the ability to, override protections, even though the center was doing the points and everything like that. But like, he had to know protections and call protections if he saw something that was weird. He had to get his offense in and out of bad looks into good looks. So cerebrally, I was like, okay, like he still has some responsibility there, but he wasn't really asked to dig them out of a lot of holes. And then as I kept watching him, and I can't remember who it was, somebody brought up like 3rd down cut-ups, and they're like, just watch every 3rd and 7 plus when the run game wasn't working.
Yep.
I was like, all right, let me try that. So I put on every single 3rd and long for the season, and I was like, okay, hold on, there might be something there. Like, they didn't get into trouble a lot, but when they got into trouble, he actually was able to bail them out at a pretty high rate. Again, didn't happen at a huge sample size, but he showed he could do it. So I was like, okay, well, let me look at every single big time throw. and I watched him thread some absolute needles, like far hash hole shots against cover 2, early on in the season. Not against top competition, but still a good throw is a good throw. He was good in the red zone. He was a great thrower on the move. And I just kept kind of putting together all these situational cut-ups, whether it was 2-minute, whether it was red zone, whether it was sudden change scenarios. And every time I just watched like situational cut-ups, I saw what people were talking about. Like beyond just arm strength, he's got a great arm. He's got good size. That 220 is legit, by the way. That was not just him chugging water for combine weigh-ins.
Nope.
He is built, like absolutely built. So he's got the physical tools. We know he's got, as far as understanding of offenses and everything like that, he's great in the whiteboard. But it wasn't until, you got away from just watching entire games start to finish, which in itself does have value, but you're just kind of waiting for these long stretches of time for him to have to just make the one throw, and then you see it, then you go back to watching them run the ball like 20 straight times. But if you're just watching all the situational cut-ups, like just show me every time he was asked to do something, he actually did the damn thing at a pretty high rate. And so I came around to him later in the process, right? I still wasn't all the way in on trading up for him because, again, he's so young, right?
Mm-hmm.
But by the time the draft came, I was more than okay with them just taking him at 11 and developing him, right? Because I had seen enough that I knew there was enough there. And I trusted that if he went to Minnesota with those weapons, with those tackles, with that coaching staff, they were going to create the best version of J.J. McCarthy, as opposed to him going to, say, New York at 6 with not as good of a support structure. Like I have far more belief in him in Minnesota than I do pretty much anywhere else that was drafting a quarterback this year. So it took me a while, but I got there. And I do think that eventually, not early, but eventually he's going to turn into a very capable starting quarterback in the league.
I think all that is true. I think all that is absolutely possible. It's the question of, as you said, it's all there if you go looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
You see the accuracy, you see decision-making, you see athletic playmaking in and out of structure. You see the right decisions being made at a pretty good speed, but it's a handful of times.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody is just projecting out, well, hey, if you just give him more reps, he'll just do more of that. Not always the case. We hope that's the case. That's the best case scenario for J.J. McCarthy. But everybody just kind of drew that line out. They had this point and this point, and they went, all right, well, if you just give him a full season worth of starting reps in the NFL, he'll do all those things at that rate. Not so fast.
It's a maybe. It's a maybe.
But he can. He's demonstrated all that stuff. And you talked about arm strength, and I wanted to go back to arm strength because this is one of those early impression things when we first saw J.J. McCarthy getting into games as a sub at Michigan, and then even early in his career when he got more starts, his arm was not great. His arm was poor. And I had that initial impression in my head. When I came back to his film, certainly from this year, and then as I watched back into last year, I was like, his arm got significantly stronger. Where did that happen?
Ben Herbert.
So I watched all of his throws all the way through Michigan. This is later in the process. Early on, I watched this year and most of last year, and then I went all the way back. And I was like, why did I have that impression? So I watched every throw that McCarthy had in college. And it was right about a year and a half ago. There was a significant jump in the pop of the ball coming off his hand. And, it's Ben Herbert and it's a lot of other things, but he was also at that point 19 and a half.
Late bloomer.
I'm just saying, I was still growing when I was 19 and a half. I grew till I was 22.
Yeah.
Like, he was basically a year out of high school, hit the college weight room, one of the best college weight rooms in the country, and you could see it. It was like somebody just turned the dial up, and all of a sudden he could drive the ball to the opposite sideline. You're like, okay, he couldn't do that in the previous season. And it was consistent after that. Once he hit that level, he had the ability to drive the ball, to make NFL throws. Again, you roll in all those other attributes. It's all there. He's got to put it all together. We've said that about a lot of guys. But again, what you said about situation is absolutely key. Could have gone to a lot of places where they threw him into the fire with less of a supporting cast, as is often the case with highly drafted quarterbacks, and I would have felt a lot worse about his potential development arc.
He gained 20 pounds while he was at Michigan in 3 years. 20 pounds of muscle, by the way, not 20 pounds of fat.
Like you said, it's real. When you see him walking around, you're like, yep, that's a real number.
Oh, that dude squats. You can just tell.
That's a real number.
He's also just a great kid. I went up to him briefly after his workout at the combine. I didn't want to bother him before it. But I went up to him on the field at the combine after he was done throwing, and had a very brief conversation with him, just, saying hi, congratulating him on a good workout, because he had a tremendous workout. Like, the ball came out great. And I swear to God, he called me sir like 8 times in 30 seconds. I was like, oh my God, you're precious. But he's a great kid. Everybody who I've talked to that knows him says they love working with him. Apparently the Vikings were smitten with him in interviews. So I wasn't super shocked that they took him. In fact, that was one of the only ones beyond, Caleb to the Bears and Nick's to Denver that we were like, no, 100% that's happening.
Most likely.
In fact, I was more sure about JJ being a Viking than I was about Jaden Daniels being a Commander.
Yep.
Like, that's how locked in I felt with that one. But he's a great kid. I wish him well. And then, Dallas Turner, again, they brought in Grenard, they brought in Van Ginkel. He's not going to be a full-time starter in year one. But if you're just looking at where he is in his development arc now, he's got a wicked long arm. He's great in terms of speed to power. I would say his ability to time his hands and string together, that kind of like chop rip on the outside. He still needs to work on that a little bit. But when you have speed to power with 35-inch arms and you have a wicked inside counter as well, when tackles start oversetting against you, you can still make that work and be very productive with it as a rookie. Plus, I think he's a pretty gnarly edge defender against tight ends. Tackles, he has the length to handle them, but again, I think tight ends is really who he dominates the most. Just look at him ragdoll Brock Bowers last year. So I think he's going to be a very good player for them, probably a rotational player early, but long-term, these top 2 guys, McCarthy and Turner, I think are going to be franchise staples, and that alone makes it a good draft class for me. As far as notable UDFAs, I do have 4 that I want to highlight here, starting with Devron Harper and Ty James, the dynamic duo from Mercer. I thought Harper probably should have been drafted. James, I was on the bubble about being drafted. Either way, they were at minimum priority free agents. They end up bringing both of them in. James, as far as control through contact, he has some of the best hands while getting obliterated that I've seen in this class. Great tracker of the deep ball. Harper's the more explosive of the two. At minimum, probably make the practice squad. They have an outside shot of making the 53, but I'm rooting for both of them. Gabe Murphy, cross-chop McGee, as we called him at the Shrine Bowl. Like, he's only got one move, but it's a hell of a move. So he might have a shot of making the final 53 as like the last guy in the edge rotation, but most likely practice squad player. And then Dwight McGlothern, the corner out of Arkansas, another guy that I thought could have been drafted somewhere in, early to mid 7th, ended up being a PFA for them. So, a lot of names here on this list, but 4 in particular that I think have a pretty good shot at making it.
Yeah, McGlothern in particular is a SEC experienced corner with size. That's always going to have some cachet with NFL teams. They're going to pull him in. He's certainly got an opportunity to try and play his way into a spot, even if it's practice squad this year, and then develop in that Brian Flores defense.
So we've been through the rookie class. We've been through the free agency pickups as well as retentions. We've been through the coaching staff. We've been through the scheme. We've been through everything. We've ideally informed you as much as we possibly can about the state of the 2024 Vikings, which brings us to our last segment. It's where we answer 2 crucial questions. First being, did this team get better? Or did they get worse? Or are they roughly the same? And we answer that with either a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or a thumbs even. For me, I'm going to go thumbs even solely because of the unanswered questions at quarterback. Everything else on this roster, truly, I think, got better. They retained the players other than Kirk that they really needed to retain. They made additions in free agency by using the money that they would have given to Kirk to spread the wealth. They upgraded at running back. They improved their edge rotation. Corners still wait and see overall, but they got better at linebacker, in my opinion. They did draft a young quarterback, which, who knows? Maybe it'll work out.
We'll see.
Still have a strong receiving core, still have a mostly strong offensive line. The roster is in a better spot now than it was this time last year. It's just the quarterback spot that we don't know, because asking anybody to come in and replace a top 12 guy in the league is tough. So I'm going to go thumbs even for that reason, but it's a very strong thumbs even.
And I'm going to go thumbs down, and it's because the quarterback spot, you're going from a top performer in the league to Darnold and a rookie. And it's nothing against J.J. McCarthy. Rookie quarterbacks take a while to get going, unless you're C.J. Stroud. I don't want to hear it. Never happened before. It takes a while. So that combination is going to be important. And I'm not going to say an impediment, because I think that's a diss, and I don't need to be throwing shade at the Vikings. That is not going to be a piece they lean on, which is a piece they have traditionally leaned on in the past seasons to elevate their offense and their team. They don't have that anymore. It's gone. The receiving core, I really liked Osborne. I thought he was good. They brought in some folks. We'll see how it balances out. O'Connell's been good at using them. Obviously, they still have JJ. But I think overall that might have declined. Running back up a little bit. Offensive line, about the same. Defensive line, Daniil Hunter was a really good player. We like Dallas. We think he's really good. He's also a rookie.
Yep.
Linebacker, better. Purely better. Secondary, we'll see. I don't feel super strong about that either. So it feels like generally even for me, but quarterback is just too much for me to say even. I've got to say thumbs down. It's a weak thumbs down. It's a barely thumbs down, but
it's an understandable thumbs down. And I think even Vikings fans would be like, yeah, I get it. And we'll circle back in October, and who knows? Yeah. Maybe this team rallies behind Darnold and or McCarthy, and we see them play better earlier than people expect, just like Houston last year. That does bring us to ceiling and floor, though. Given the unknown nature of their quarterback group, what is your ceiling in wins and your floor in wins?
My ceiling's 9, and it's the combination of uncertainty at quarterback, but also the division got better around them. There is more competition, and look, you play everybody in your division twice. You have to win out in your division if you want a chance at the playoffs. Divisional games are going to be tough for them this year in a way that they haven't been in years past. We're talking about this division all week. Detroit, obviously, ton of success. Green Bay got pretty darn good at the end of the year, and I don't think that's going to turn around anytime soon. Chicago's made a massive improvement from where they were last year. There's just no easy games in the division anymore. So you combine that with some uncertainty at quarterback and just, meshing new players and new roles, especially that are key roles on the offense. It's going to be tough for this team to see double-digit wins.
I have a pretty wide cone myself just because of the unknown at quarterback. And I want to emphasize unknown, because the other side of unknown is could be pretty good.
Could work. Absolutely.
So my floor is 6 if Darnold flames out and McCarthy just isn't ready. This could be a 6-win team. My ceiling is 10. They could also be a wild card in the NFC. And I know that sounds like a cop-out of you're saying they could be good and could be bad. Yeah, that's the point. They could be good and could be bad. We don't know. Quarterback is important.
It's not a cop-out. It's the truth. And we see this team in a very similar way. I'm just slightly, and I do mean slightly by a very thin shade, less optimistic, because my ceiling's 9, my floor is 5 for the exact same reasons. We're seeing it the same way, and we'll see how it plays out. Does this mean we're going to be right? Absolutely not. We're right about some of these and wrong about some of these every year. Vikings could very well prove us wrong. They come out of the gate hot, build up a decent lead, Who knows?
And honestly, I think Vikings fans would be perfectly okay with an 8-win season as long as, McCarthy shows pop and just looks. Let's just say he gets on the field eventually, right? Second half of the year. Let's say he gets on the field starting in like November. Give him the last 6-7 games, right? If he pops and he just shows something and they end up with 8 wins, I don't think Vikings fans are going to care at all.
No, they shouldn't.
They just want to know that like their future is secure. Get some highlights from Dallas Turner, get some highlights from JJ McCarthy. Just look like they belong.
Yep.
And then, we'll run this back in 2025. We'll add more players. We'll improve the supporting cast as best we can. And that's when we make the push in 2025, right? So I think it's all Vikings fans want. They just want hope for the future. They're not expecting anything now. As far as like win now expectations, that was last year, right? And that unfortunately got screwed up by injury. But now it's future mode. That's all Vikings fans probably, or at least should, care about at this point. So if you're a Vikings fan and you watch this whole thing, thank you. Again, if you want to go grab a Dallas Turner drawing shirt or any other Vikings gear, you can check out Homage. They have a Vikings license. Or if you're another NFL fan who just popped in to see what Minnesota was up to this year in their annual shenanigans, any NFL team, Homage has the license for it. So you can passively support the show by getting anything at our link or at the QR code on the screen. Or if you want to directly support us, you can do so on our Patreon. And of course, we once again thank our executive producers on Patreon for supporting us as long as they have and making this show work before we even had sponsors. It's been 5 off seasons doing this now ish. I think we started in 2020.
Yeah. This is our 3rd off-season preview series as it exists now. But yeah, we are into our 5th year, solidly into our 5th year as Bootleg, which seems somewhat unreal, sometimes shorter, sometimes very much longer than that. But can't thank all of you enough for any way that you support the show, by watching, by subscribing, by putting in comments, following us on social media, buying a shirt, showing up at events. Any of those ways, any and all of those ways help support us and keep this going.
We only have 2 more teams to go in this series. Again, if you're just watching your first one, you have 29 others to catch up on. We have 2 more to go, starting with the Evil Empire, Green Bay Packers, tomorrow.
Because, of course, they got another quarterback.
Last year, we said that we'd jump off the balcony if it happened again. Well, I said I'd jump off the balcony. You were just going to drink yourself into a stupor. Again, that door is unlocked. We'll see how tomorrow's show goes. I'm not feeling great about it. And also, I'm not making a Wisconsin Old Fashioned for the show. I know cheeseheads have been asking me about that. Wisconsin Old Fashions are not an Old Fashioned. It's a fruit basket with a little bit of brandy in it. All right? It's not a real drink.
Of all things to rail against. Sure, choose that one.
I have a lot of problems with the state of Wisconsin. Anyway, that's tomorrow. Really can't wait to record that one. At least we're finishing off on a fun team, the Detroit Lions, who are rapidly approaching Evil Empire status themselves.
Which has got to be the weirdest thing ever for Detroit Lions fans. But we are happy for you.
I'm sure Lions fans are like, what do you mean we're hated? Yes, you're winning. That means you're hated. You're evil now. Embrace it. So 2 teams left to go overall. Almost can't believe it. We've been recording for like 2 months straight now. So feels good. We'll be back Thursday? I don't know. Whatever tomorrow is, we'll be back tomorrow with the Packers and the Lions. We'll see you then.